Welcome to the Insolvency Law podcast, providing specialist insolvency and debt-related advice for business owners and individuals. For more information on debt recovery, business restructuring, and personal and corporate insolvency, visit our website www.insolvencyandlaw.co.uk or call us now on 020 7504 1300.
Hello and welcome back to the Insolvency Law podcast. Insolvency Law is an award-winning consultancy firm specialising in insolvency, debt purchasing and business rescue. Today, I'll be speaking with the insolvency extraordinaire again, Director Peter Murray, to bring you another insightful episode. Last week, we gave you an introduction into Ponzi schemes with our episode When Sweet Investments Turn Sour. And in the coming weeks, we will be delving deeper into what this really means and honing in on the details to give you a stronger insight into the world of investments. So this week, we will be honing in on missed payments, which is arguably the aspect people worry most about when making an investment. So Peter, let's get into it.
Sarah, hi, how are you?
Hi.
Yes, let's get into it. Let's do this.
So firstly, what do we really mean when we say missed payments in the world of investments?
Well, with these type of investments, and can we just limit it to just like unregulated investments? And this is investment schemes that are not regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. You may say invest, £50,000, and in return you may get your interest may be scheduled to be paid to you every 6 months or every 12 months. It's going to be paid to you periodically every 6 or 12 months, say. And it's very important that you remember those payment dates and, of course, expect to be paid on those dates. And if you're not paid on those dates, then something must be wrong. And that's when you should look to take action.
So what could be some reasons for payments being missed? Could they be both legitimate and illegitimate reasons?
Yes, they could be legitimate. It could be illegitimate reasons. But the fact of the matter is the payment date has been missed. So straight away, that represents a breach of contract from the other side because they would have contractually agreed to make payments to you on specific dates. And if those dates have come and gone and you've not been paid, that's a breach of contract. You now need to make contact with the institution and seek payment at the earliest opportunity. And, you've really got to hear what they've got to say. But you really do need to take some sort of action the moment you realize you haven't been paid your interest payment.
Right. And, last week we did actually speak about the need to act quickly. Could we delve a little bit deeper into what that would mean and how someone should go about that in the best way? Yeah.
Well, look, if you haven't been paid, it's very unusual for the institution to say, well, we actually forgot to pay you, because no, they won't forget to pay you. These dates are scheduled and these dates are all, they're sort of
right.
Automatic, so like dip into the fund and collect some money and send it on to you. It's all automated,
right?
And so if you haven't been paid, 9 times out of 10, if you haven't been paid when you are supposed to be paid, it usually is because of liquidity. There is an insufficient amount of liquidity to pay, or if it isn't liquidity, it is because they have made a conscious effort and have decided that you will not be paid. Either way, it's still a breach of the agreement you entered into when you parted with your investment capital.
And could I also ask, because I'm coming from it from a sort of layperson perspective, excuse me, as I imagine, quite a few people are, should you be able to withdraw your funds when you want? Or is it a case of this is the date, this is when you're going to get paid? You can't just contact us to withdraw money whenever you want. Is that the case?
Well, yes, the devil's always in the detail, and it depends what's in the contract. Generally speaking, you part of your investment capital, and beforehand before parting with your investment capital, you will know beforehand how often you are going to be remunerated with your actual interest payment, whether that's, frequently as quarterly, which I doubt, maybe half yearly, or just maybe annually. And so, you've got these specific dates when you expect to get your interest on your invested capital paid to you. Should those dates come and go and you are not paid, you do need to take action. Early action is always the best action. Contact the institution and establish why you haven't been paid. And if the response you get is not satisfactory, then of course, you need to consider taking some type of enforcement action to enforce the institution to actually pay what is due to you.
And actually, I was going to ask you, what would constitute an unsatisfactory response? What should people look out for to kind of make that light bulb go on in their head? Like, oh, this doesn't feel right. What kind of sort of dodgy responses have you seen people give? Well,
in the last 18 months or so, as you can imagine, the number one response is down to COVID.
Yeah.
But we know that really is untrue.
There's only so long people can milk that one as well, isn't there?
Quite, in many respects. Look, I'd be very concerned if an institution did not pay me for whatever the reason. If you've contracted to pay me on a certain date and you haven't paid me on that date, then, my radars go up.
Right.
I will be concerned. I'd probably give you 7 days to actually, make good on the oversight of not paying me. And if you haven't paid me within the next 7 days, what I'm due, then I consider that you are in breach of contract, and I'll be demanding my investment capital back, as well as all the accrued interest to date. And I'd seek to recover that at the earliest opportunity.
I think 7 days is actually is a really important thing to hone in on, because I think a lot of people would give companies the benefit of the doubt and go far beyond the 7 days. I mean, I'm sure have you seen incidents where it's been months since they've had a payment, or potentially more than that? Is that something you've come across?
Yeah, absolutely. I've met investors who haven't been paid for months. Literally months. I mean, many, many, many months, and they are still very hopeful. And you've just got to say to them that, look, wake up and smell the coffee. You've got to take action if you really do want to recover what you have invested, as well as your interest payments. And the only way, not the only way, but the best way to actually achieve that is literally by taking legal action against that company, against that institution.
So let's go on to that now, as we're talking about acting quickly. And so you're saying, you've got a due date on the payment. If that hasn't come, maybe give them 7 days and then take action. What should they do? Who should they contact? Who can they trust? Who can they not trust? What's the best course? What's the first step somebody should take? Because I can imagine that this is probably quite overwhelming emotionally as well. And people might feel quite helpless and not knowing who to turn to. So what, in your eyes, is the best first step to take?
There are solicitors, there are debt experts, there are, debt practitioners, insolvency advisors. There are a range of different professionals.
Such as yourself?
Yeah, there are a range of different professionals in our marketplace, who would gladly provide, valuable assistance to an investor who actually wanted to recover their investment plus interest from a scheme that they have invested in. And for example, if you came to us, we would be on it straight away, and dare I say, we would be quite bullish too. We would inform the institution that we act on your behalf, and we'd give them 7 days to make payment. And if they didn't make, and we will let them know in no uncertain terms, if they don't make payment within 7 days, we can only assume that the company is insolvent. And the definition of insolvency in the law in England and Wales, the Insolvency Act 1986, defines insolvency as an as one's inability to pay debts when falling due. So the fact that, these investments returns are falling due and your inability to pay them would suggest to us that the company is insolvent. And if the company is insolvent and continuing to trade, then we will have a very strong argument as to why that company should no longer be trading, why that company should be wound up in the interest of all investors, creditors, and other stakeholders. And the whole winding up goes to obviously a licensed insolvency practitioner who is a liquidator, who would, liquidate the company and realize funds sufficient enough to repay creditors. But usually then, if you sort of like act too late, then you tend to find that when the company is wound up and when the assets are actually realized, you tend to find that there's almost always inevitably a very substantial shortfall for in terms of funds to be distributed to investors. And Sarah, in many cases investors get zero back because there is nothing at all. And that's why it's very good, it makes sense to actually take this type of action sooner rather than later, because usually the company will not want to be wound up, and they are only dealing with one complainant, which is yourself, so to speak, and usually they will have sufficient funds to pay you because you've screamed the loudest and you've taken the worst action against them. So that usually they will find the funds to pay you and continue to do what they have been doing, just continue to trade and continue to take unsuspecting investors' capital and not paying them their return. At some planned date in the organizer's mind, they will plan to demise the company, having squirreled away all the or what's left of investors' capital.
And I suppose if you're dealing with a situation like that, where there is a company, whether it be a Ponzi scheme or somebody who had, genuine intentions to begin with, and, now it's gone a bit wrong, is there any other way to be able to tell other than I've got a missed payment, or is that really where the red flags start showing up?
The red flag has got to be, Sarah, on the missed payment.
Yeah.
That's when the clock begins to tick for you.
Mm.
And normally those on the other side, you're sort of like, what they call them these days, investment managers or investment consultants or liaison officer, etc. But representatives for the institution will give you all the patter, will give you all the excuses.
Yeah.
It's just a glitch in our system. Something's gone wrong. We're working on it. But they will never, ever say to you that we have a liquidity issue. But, usually if you're not paid, it's because of liquidity. And you do, honestly, you do need to take action because it's not going to get better. It will only get worse from here on. So you need to take action. If you take action early enough, there's a good chance that you will recover 100% of your investment and 100% of the accrued returns. But if you keep waiting, then the chances of you recovering 100%, that begins to slide backwards.
And that's really important to note, I think, because I think a lot of people aren't aware of that and they give companies the benefit of the doubt, like we said.
Yeah, never give these companies the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
Look, it's contractual. I give you £50,000. You give me, let's just say 10%, per annum. And so, I get £5,000 every anniversary that I keep my £50,000 investment with you. So November 1 has come and gone. I ought to have been paid on that date. I've not been paid. I will make contact with you. I want to know, why have I not been paid? And I also want to know, more importantly, that I will be paid in the next 3 days. But I'm prepared to give you 7 days. But if I'm not paid within those 7 days, I'm going to take legal action. I will not give you any longer to to actually, come back to me with another excuse as to, where my money is. No, I'll take legal action straight away.
And it's funny you spoke about the excuse of technical difficulties, because that is one that even I've come across as well. They do tend to pop up, oh, we've got system issues or technical difficulties as to why you couldn't get paid. I mean, that's really quite a red flag, I suppose, that one.
Yes, of course.
Now, look, we all know, I think, that investments are risks. All investments, Would you say that's accurate? All investments are risks?
All, especially unregulated investments, are a huge risk. And investors, they ought to be aware of the type of investment schemes that they're letting themselves get into. And investors ought to be aware of their own appetite towards risk, whether they are risk averse, if they are, or whether they have a huge appetite for high risk and high reward. But we all know, high returns are accompanied with high risk, and, very low returns are accompanied with very little risk. And you've got to know where you fit in between the two extremes, whether you are risk averse, or whether, you have the appetite for risk.
And in terms of sort of being regulated and unregulated, again, I'm coming from it from a layperson's perspective. Is that something that you can find out beforehand when you're doing your due diligence? And really, it's up to you whether you want to go for that or not.
Yes, you can. You just go to the Financial Conduct Authority, the FCA's website, and, look at the companies offering you these amazing returns. Check them out, see if they are FCA registered. But look, don't get me wrong, not all unregulated investments go wrong.
No, of course.
There is a high likelihood that most of them do go wrong. Not all, most do go wrong. And, not all will default making payments to you. Some of these unregulated investments, they do actually survive over the course of time. And they do say they do say what's on the tin. They'll take your money and they will give you your returns, and come maturity, they'll also return your invested capital back to you. But how do you tell a good scheme from a bad scheme? And that's when you've got to employ the very best discernment you possibly can to discern whether it's less riskier to go with one company offering these returns than any other company. But, that's a due diligence that you need to undertake yourself and be satisfied yourself that where you are committing your funds, you've checked them out, you've done as much due diligence as you can, and you are not just happy to make the investment, but if it all goes terribly sour, you could actually sustain the loss. If you can't sustain the loss, then for heaven's sake, don't do it.
That's key, isn't it, really? That is key. Now, I just wondered if you'd be able to talk to us about, not mentioning any names, of course, or companies or people, but a couple of success stories where situations like this have happened, like everything we've just discussed. People have made the risk, they've taken it, they've gone for it, and then, there's a missed payment or 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever, and they've come to you for help. Can you give us a couple of examples of when you've managed to retrieve their funds and it's all happy days?
Oh, Sarah, this is this is literally quite a revolving door.
Wow.
Investors come to us every week, all the time.
Every week. I mean, that's a staggering amount.
Yeah. Because, they've invested anything from 5,000 up to £250,000.
Wow.
Into investments. They were promised the earth and, were delivered very little. And, they are basically saying that, look, they were expecting to get their interest returned in the recent weeks. Usually when they contact me, it's either the recent weeks or the recent months. And even, they say that they can't even get their capital back also. But, it's clear that the other side has committed a substantial breach of contract. We take an instruction from that investor. We will then make contact with the company. We'll give them a formal demand. We let them know in no uncertain terms if we do not receive payment of our clients' funds, then we will take immediate legal action against that company, and the action usually is insolvency proceedings. And we tend to find that those companies do not want to be the subject of insolvency proceedings. So guess what? They pay up. And so we tend to receive payment of the investment, of the interest accrued to date, and also payment of the investor's cost of enforcement. And so when investors, when they do come to us at a very early stage, the chances are we will recover their funds for them in full, provided they come at a very early stage. If they leave it too late, then who knows? We may recover something, but how much? No idea.
And this actually sparked a question in my mind. In certain situations where perhaps, investors have found each other on social media, they've come together to try to form some kind of plan of action themselves, and then they take it upon themselves to instruct a liquidator. At that point, how likely is it that they're going to get their funds back once the liquidators come in?
Well, I suppose an investors, they may instruct the liquidator, but the liquidator cannot take any action unless the company has entered into a formal statutory insolvency procedure. What tends to happen is investors, they tend to belong to other investor groups or clubs. So they tend to, amalgamate together, and they may go to a law firm, and the law firm may then, advise investors, look, the way forward is to put this company into compulsory liquidation. Once the company is in liquidation, we can then appoint our own liquidator, and that liquidator will then go about liquidating the affairs and realizing the assets within the company. But look, that liquidator, if you take that course, you are treated no differently to any other creditor. All creditors must be treated the same, must be treated equally. And so that liquidator will, once it comes down to that stage, that liquidator will realize the assets for the benefit of all creditors, not just you or not just a specific group of creditors. No, it's the assets are realized for the benefit of all creditors, and the proceeds then distributed to creditors on an equal basis once the cost of the insolvency has been met. And it's a cost of the insolvency that usually is quite a significant cost, and that can, really, once the cost has been accounted for, it's very possible that investors may get, a single figure percentage return back to them, to like 8 or 9%. But if these investment schemes come to an end at an earlier stage, then the returns can be, higher than single figures, could be 20, 30, as much as 40%. I've never seen where investors have recovered, more than 50, 60% of their investment.
Wow.
There's always, it's either a significant loss or a total loss.
Wow, that's pretty eye-opening. To go something positive, just to go back to my earlier question, could you give us an example of, a success story that you've had that's been either your favorite one or, the most high value one? Just an example. And if you feel the need to omit names, please do. But if you feel you want to share them, absolutely do as well.
I had a very recent one. I think this was back in August. It's this lady had invested £10,000 exactly into a scheme, and she was promised annual returns. I think it's biannual returns, and those returns were not forthcoming. So she'd missed 2 biannual returns. And then, she, at that time, she had given up and she'd come to me for assistance. And we went online, we'd done some initial due diligence on the company that owed the funds. And I was pretty confident that we could help her, but to what extent, I wasn't quite sure whether we could recover the entire £10,000 or a part of it. But I knew that we'd be successful in some way, shape, or form. Anyway, she came on board. She instructed us. We received the instructions and we acted. We made contact with the company, and we were quite successful, in fact, in recovering 100% of this lady's investment, the £10,000, plus the returns that she were promised, and as well as the cost that she incurred in instructing our service. But, that turned out, that particular recovery, I have to say, I dealt with 2 individuals throughout. I mean, I was on the phone speaking to them on occasions, but most of it was done on email. And, I very quickly formed the conclusion that this business was being run out of somewhere in Ireland. And we had two individuals, and you just knew that this just wasn't your sort of like typical investment business,
Right.
investment company.
Yeah.
Just the way they spoke so casually, informally,
Right.
and the way in which they just agreed to just repay the money, just make sure that we just don't want that. We just want to end the insolvency proceedings. We don't want no publicity. We don't want no adverse findings. Let's just pretend this didn't happen. Here's your £10,000. Here's the returns that were promised, and here's the cost that your client has incurred.
Wow.
And but they do happen. They do happen, and I would say more often than not, they do happen, because what these scheme managers, what they don't want for the scheme to unravel very quickly before they've had the chance to do what they do. It is awful, I know, but our instructions is to recover what is due to our client. And once we recover what is due to our client, we have no further
That's your job done ultimately
in that business. Yeah, although you are aware that that entity will continue to trade and take investors' money and do their ill deeds. But that's one. I can tell you another one.
Please do.
This individual, he was owed £75,000. He'd actually taken the £75,000 from his pension fund, and he'd committed his pension fund proceeds into an investment. They promised him 15% per annum. First year, he didn't get it. This was in the midst of COVID. I think he waited another 9-10 months. He didn't get it. Actually, once he was approaching me, we were coming up to the 2nd anniversary of his of this particular investment scheme. He instructed us to recover his money, which we did. And I have to say, immediately we recovered his funds and discontinued the legal proceedings against this company. This company actually went bust the following week.
Wow, my goodness. And then it would have been considerably more difficult for him to retrieve any funds at that point, wouldn't it?
Yeah, he would have been lucky to have recovered 10%.
Wow.
But he recovered through us 100% plus his costs.
That's incredible.
Plus his enforcement costs.
Plus the costs.
And that's why it really does make a very huge difference that you act early and not late.
I was going to say that this really, really does emphasize how important it is to act early. And sadly, it kind of is. You've just got to think about your own interests and kind of getting your funds back and just act as quickly as possible. Because if you do leave it, it sounds like the chances of getting even 10% back become very slim, which is quite a distressing fact. But I suppose that's why we're honing in on the idea of acting quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the telltale signs, well, especially you've got these newly formed companies with a very small balance sheet, or you might have companies that's got registered county court judgments or unpaid debts, which is usually unpaid returns or unpaid investment capital. Companies where once you do your due diligence, you find out it's just a lone director. So there are lots, and when you bring all these findings together to make one big finding, would you really part with your money in that particular company? Of course you wouldn't. You
Absolutely.
move away from it.
No, you would. And that's why I think we want to do this series as well, is to kind of really highlight to people things they can do before, things they can do after, if you've already committed. And I think it's a really important series for people who are thinking of investing or who have already invested to listen to, because Peter is full of facts and stories about this exact topic. And thank you so much, Peter, for another brilliant episode, very insightful. And we are going to continue doing episodes on investments and what you can do beforehand and after to ensure sort of the least stressful experience and the most successful experience.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Peter, once again.
More than welcome, Sarah. Happy to be with you.
And we'll speak to you in the next one.
Will do. We'll spread knowledge. Will do.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening to the Insolvency and Law podcast. If you require additional guidance on any of the topics we covered today, visit the Resource Centre at our website, www.insolvencyandlaw.co.uk, or call us now on 020 7504 1300.